Again, welcome to Prairie Community Church this morning. It's good to see you guys. And as we dive into our message for this morning, if you need a bulletin, let Todd know, because on the back is a place to take some notes for our conversation this morning. And so as we kind of dive into our conversation this morning, I was just kind of reflecting this past week on my experience graduating high school and moving away from the only place I ever lived, only place I ever really knew. And a lot of you guys have gone through this experience, whether it was to go off to college, maybe a trade school, or maybe you're just getting out of your parents' home. And it's a weird experience when you really think about it. Because here you are, you lived in this town maybe for most of your life, right? You've lived in a home with the same people, you know their habits and the weird things that they do. And then all of a sudden you're forced into this new environment with people you don't know, and you begin to get to know them better than maybe you want to. Right? So I remember for myself, right, I went away to college, and I had 3 other guys I was sharing this room with. And not to mention, it was called a suite, so we had a bathroom I shared with 4 other guys. And so here I have this new environment with new people, and I learned some really weird habits about them, right? Someone I just meet, and all of a sudden I know whether or not they're a snorer, right? I all of a sudden know their hygiene habits and whether they shower daily. And trust me, you knew. I knew how messy they were. It was funny, right? They get clean, right, when you're around girls and all these outside settings, and all of a sudden you go back to the room and you're like, dude, this place is a mess, right? I knew these weird things about them, right? Roommates that shave without shaving cream, right? What monsters. Roommates that shower maybe once a week. And I swear, that did happen. I had a roommate, I love him so much. He was so outgoing in the morning, right? He would wake up singing, and he would wake up happy, you know what I'm talking about. And the first few months, it really ticked me off. Because I wake up in the morning and I don't want to talk to anybody. I barely want to be up. And here he is, super happy and exciting. And here's the thing. I don't really want to know some of those things about people. And those little things that they do, right? Their hygiene habits, the way that they take care of their things, the way they get into my things, it frustrates me. It bothers me. You see, I expected them to shower daily. I expected them to keep their space clean. I expected them to ask me before they touched my stuff. Right? These are all, to me, normal expectations. Right? I expected them to not talk to me in the morning till I approach them. Right? That actually became a rule after a while. I will approach you when I'm ready to talk to you. See, I expected them to do certain things. I had these expectations. Yet here's where the tension arose. I had these expectations, yet I never told them about my expectations. How could they know I didn't want them talking to me before I fully woke up? Right? How could they know that I didn't want them touching my stuff? See, I had these expectations, yet I never communicated it to them. And because I had these unspoken expectations, they naturally didn't meet these expectations. I got angry with them. I got frustrated. I began to grow a little bitter. I came across this quote this week. I have no idea who this man is, but Neil Strauss really states this kind of theme really well. He says, unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments. And that describes my scenario really well. And maybe you could think of those scenarios as well, where you have a relationship with someone and you have a set of expectations. And the reality is, if you don't speak those expectations, you are setting yourself up for frustration and for resentment. See, at some point in our relationships, whether it's with roommates, whether it's with coworkers, whether it's with our spouses, we actually need to talk to them. And I'm kidding, but I'm not kidding at the same time, right? You actually have to talk to them, right? You have these expectations, you have these things that you need, and you have to open your mouth and communicate to them. Because unspoken expectations can destroy relationships. Naturally, we expect others to pick up on how we are feeling. We expect them to react certain ways when we walk in the door with a certain cloud above us. We just expect them to know these things. We expect them to know our every need and our desire. But most of you, probably like me, don't pick up on that so quickly, right? You got to tell me very clearly how you're feeling, where you're at. And you need to do the same in all your relationships as well. These unspoken expectations are just premeditated resentments. We need to communicate in some manner to let people know what we need, because if not, this resentment builds and builds and builds and builds. And this played out in my college roommate experience, and guarantee you most of you all can think of an experience like that as well, particularly probably when you moved away from home for the first time. I hope you guys kind of see the connection here of where we're going, because we're in this book of Song of Solomon, and we're talking about romantic relationships, and this principle is certainly true as well. See, we as married individuals, or those who are in a serious romantic relationship, we want depth and we want connection, but the problem is we essentially have unspoken expectations and we don't communicate them with our loved ones. We want depth and connection, but we don't give it. Nor do we give our spouse or significant other the opportunity to show it. Right? If we don't communicate what we need, if we don't come to them and let them know where we're at, how do we expect them to meet that need? And what happens, unfortunately, in many relationships, particularly in marriages, if we don't have those needs met in that relationship, we'll find it in other places. We'll find it in relationships at work. We'll find it in relationships with friends or family, sometimes even with our own children. Or we'll seek out other places just to kind of bury this need, whether we seek out vacations or our hobbies, substances. Deep down within us, God gave us a desire to be connected, intimately connected to our romantic partners, right? Particularly our spouses. And if we don't find it there, we're going to find it somewhere else. So how do we facilitate this depth in connection? We kind of talked about this last week, and now we're kind of leaning more into this. And so if you would turn with me to the book of Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs, depending on the translation you have. It's the same thing. We're going to be looking at verses 8 through 11 of chapter 1 as we move into week 3 of the series, Love Is, right? We're going through a study of the book of Song of Solomon, evaluating this important word, love. Because this book is targeted at people who are engaged or seriously dating, or people who are married, focusing on what does it mean to love an individual. And obviously it leans toward or lends itself to romantic relationships, but it overflows into other areas of our life. So hopefully you kind of turn there. We're going to look at that in a second. But in our world today, when we're talking about the employment environment, it seems like finding a good employee can be a challenge. Right? Most of you guys have experienced that. It can be a challenge because maybe the labor pool is kind of small, or finding someone with the skill set that you need. Or you don't have maybe quite the money you need to pay for the skill set that you need. But I think it's kind of funny, in our environment today, that the standard for a good employee has lowered. Right? Ultimately, if you'll show up and you'll just do the work, then you're a good employee. Right? It's such a low standard, but that it's amazing that I've met people who work harder to get out of work than just to do the work itself. Right? The biggest challenge is getting people to show up and do the work. That's it. And in our relationships, this is an important element as well. For most relationships, just showing up and making yourself available to the other individual will help solve a majority of issues that you might be experiencing. So we're going to look at Song of Solomon verses 8 through 11. But because we're kind of going through this study a little different than we normally do, where we're taking just a few verses at a time, it's so easy to lose the context. So I just want to read the first part of the chapter first until we end at verse 8, and we'll start talking about where we're at today. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 1. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, right? Solomon wrote this. Verse number 2. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore, virgins love you. Draw me after you. Let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers. Here, we talked about this the first week. She's calling for physical intimacy with her lover. Here's the third party here. the daughters of Jerusalem, we will exalt and rejoice in you. We will we will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. Verse 5, we were here last week. She says, I am very dark but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's sons were angry with me. They made me keeper of the vineyards, but my own vineyard I have not kept. Tell me, you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. For why should I be like one who veils herself besides the flock of your companions? We'll pause there for one moment. That's what we've covered in the first 2 weeks in our conversation. And essentially, you have this pronouncement of a desire for physical closeness with her lover. And then last week, believe it's starting in verse 5, she communicates this insecurity she has about the way that she looks, and she has this desire to be in the presence of her lover. She's looking for some assurance. And so we pick back up here following verse 7 where she calls and asks, hey, where do you pasture your flock? Where do you take a break? I want to meet up with you and connect with you. Right? It's like calling up your spouse. Hey, where are you having lunch today? I want to spend some time with you. And she makes this statement in verse 7, but by the time you get to verse 8, you have this jest of sorts by the daughters of Jerusalem, this kind of third party in this poetic narrative where they hear her ask in verse 7 where her lover is, and so they respond, verse 8, if you do not know, O most beautiful among women, follow in the tracks of the flock and pasture your young goats besides the shepherd's tents. So they make that statement in response to verse 7, almost in a joking manner, trying to address really two items there. The first is, do you even know him? Do you even know him? Let's go back. Look at what they're saying. If you do not know, right, if you don't know where he's at, do you even know the guy you're seeking? Here's how you can follow him. Follow the tracks, right? The flock has made trails. You can follow them, and you'll probably find the guy you're looking for. And so they make this statement out of jest, right? If you can't apprehend the position of Solomon, or as the illustration's going here, as a shepherd, if you don't know what he does or how to find him, then maybe you need to find somebody else. So they're kind of pushing back a little bit on this. But kind of the first thing they're addressing there in verse 8 is, do you even know him? And then, are you aware of what this relationship takes? If you look back there at verse 8, I'll kind of skip back here in a second. It makes the statement, right? Follow in the tracks of the flock, pasture your young goats beside the shepherd's tents. Man, I'm telling you, when you read through all the resources on Song of Solomon, you'll have one statement like that and 8 different opinions from 3 different people on what that means. And what I see there as you're kind of following this illustration, as you kind of see the jest and the flow of the narrative, that's why I wanted to read through the whole section so far, is what they are saying there is, are you aware of what this relationship takes? Are you willing to follow him? And are you willing to literally kind of live outside there with your flock as well, right? You are following a shepherd. Are you willing to live the shepherd life? You'll live just like him. You desire to be with this man. Do you know what it takes to be with this man? Do you know the type of lifestyle he has? And what they're doing there is they are calling her to abandon her reserve and to boldly claim him, right? Go to him, right? You're asking where he's at. No, you go to him and make yourself available. And this is important because starting in verse 5, where she's talking about her physical insecurities, saying she desires physical presence with him, here we see an encouragement for her to go to him and to find him, to make herself available to him. So she has this need, yet she has to make the step and make that need known. Right? She has, you could say, a set of expectations, yet she has to communicate those expectations. And so for us, in our relationships, with all of these unspoken expectations, maybe you have them here today, and you're frustrated at your spouse because they're not picking up what you're putting down. What you need to do here is you need to make yourself available. Go to them. Communicate with them. Let them know where you are at. when you are feeling vulnerable, insecure, and there's something weighing heavily on you, who or what do you run to? In our text here, you see the daughters of Jerusalem encouraging the beloved to go to her lover, find him, make yourself available to him. Do you give them the opportunity to show love to you? Right? You have these expectations for them. Have you communicated those expectations? Here's a resource I want to highlight real quick. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's called the 5 Love Languages. Dr. Gary Chapman kind of pioneered this conversation of sorts. There's a lot of resources on it. But in his work, he pretty much says, hey, everyone responds pretty well to one of these 5 love languages, and you essentially tend to give love in one of these ways. So let's kind of walk through them real quick, and the name's there. You can Google it. You can find the resources. But when we're talking about making ourselves available, kind of think through maybe this lens, right? Maybe your spouse comes to you. How do they communicate, how does love best received for them? How do you communicate love to them? Maybe through words of affirmation, and what that is just talking to them, complimenting them, right? We're not flattering them, we're saying truth to them, but we're also just affirming them for who they are. Physical touch, right? Obviously, there's more intimate connotations with that, but sometimes it's simply holding hands, giving hugs, cuddling on the couch. Gifts, right? Some people appreciate gifts, not necessarily because they're all worldly and stuff, but what it means is someone thought of them, they know things that they like, and they purchased it to give it to them as a kind of a display of that. Quality time, kind of exactly what it sounds like, just spending time with them. Acts of service, right? Doing things that help them or assist them. And so everyone receives one of these love languages well, and everyone tends to give it in a certain way. So it's a two-way street. And so what we see in our text is if we want to facilitate depth and connection, we got to make ourselves available. And so maybe as you kind of think about that with your partner, do you know what their love language is? How do they best respond to affection? Maybe it's through physical touch or gifts or words of affirmation. It's a two-way street. Now, sometimes, if we want to facilitate depth and connection, right, we have to make ourselves available, but there's more to it as well. We see it here in our text. But many of y'all have children, and you know, if you have children, they get excited about a lot of things, right? Sometimes they get injured, and they come to you running and screaming, and they're hurt. Sometimes they made something and created something, and they want your attention. They want to show it to you. And they're looking for your physical presence, but often they're also looking for your verbal support. Right? They want us to hear them. They want to hear us, to know where we are at. And so showing up is very important, but sometimes you actually have to use your words. Let's take a look at the next section of our text. Have it up there on the screen. This is the first time that the lover speaks in the Song of Solomon. And this is important to remember in context. She has just spoken a list of insecurities she has about how she looks physically. And so here we have the lover speaking up, and he says this: I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. Which I don't know how your wife would respond to that. But it was a compliment, right? You look like a mare, a female horse. Calling your wife a horse is probably not the best thing. But in this context, it was a very high compliment. For a woman who felt insecure about how she looked physically, the first words that come out of his mouth are, again, those words of affirmation. Hey, you might think you look a certain way physically, but you are a mare among Pharaoh's chariots. And with Solomon as the author, this is quite the compliment, right? He is quite the horse connoisseur, right? If you look at the history of what he had as a king, right? He had 1,400 war chariots. He had over 12,000 horsemen, tons and tons of stalls to house all these animals. He imported horses from all over. He knew what a good horse looked like. And what he is saying here is, man, you are the mare among Pharaoh's chariots. And it's kind of a double compliment in itself. Because as I was kind of reading a little bit about horses this week, Pharaoh's chariots were not pulled by mares. They were pulled by stallions. And so to enter a mare into the mix is going to create quite a bit of chaos, right? You have a bunch of guy horses, and all of a sudden there is a nice mare there. And so what he's saying here, he's like, you are like the only woman among men. Out of all the stallions, they would all want you. All the men want you. You're attractive. You look fantastic. You are better than the best. And again, I don't know a better way to describe that because my history or my knowledge on horse culture is pretty slim. But this is a strong compliment that Solomon is paying her. And he's leaning into her insecurity about her physical features by assuring her that, no, you are downright gorgeous. You are the best of the best. And this is cool because as you read through the Song of Solomon, he initially will come up multiple times over and over again complimenting her physical beauty. And he's not just flattering her, he actually truly means it. She expresses insecurity, and he meets this insecurity with security. That's why I've titled this message, right? Love is safe. He meets her insecurity with security. Look at verse 10. He continues, your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of gold. And again, there's a lot of debate on whether or not he's shifting from the imagery of horses to her physical features, if Solomon is still speaking as if he is a shepherd or he is a king. But I believe if you're going to go from verse 9 to verse 10, we're going to continue the conversation. And so what he's doing here is he's, again, further complimenting the looks of what a great-looking mare would be. She would be highly decorated, right? Horses and Pharaoh's army, these chariots had decorations on them. And so he's saying, only the best horses are decorated in this manner. You are one of the best horses, right? Jewelry is used to heighten the sense of beauty and value. He is expressing affection in his reaction to her surpassing beauty, right? Again, he's complimenting her. So he's expressing this affection. He's complimenting her beauty. And for us, as we connect this to our relationships, what we see here is we see him verbally expressing affection, right? He met her insecurity with security. And for our relationships, it's important for us to verbally express affection to each other as well, right? You got to show up, you need to be available, and you actually need to talk to each other. Verbally express affection in public and in private, right? When was the last time you acknowledged your partner and verbally expressed support, right? Came alongside them and let them vent and let them know, hey, you are right there in their corner with them. When was the last time that you spent time just complimenting them, right? Not flattering them, but just complimenting them for what they do maybe around the house or for just their surpassing beauty or masculinity? Do you appreciate them and find them attractive? Do you thank them for the work that they do in your family or outside of the home? Right? This is all part of important elements of a healthy relationship. Showing up and expressing affection and support. Verse 11, we'll begin to finish up here. There's a third party in this book. You have the lover, the beloved, and then you have a group called the Daughters of Jerusalem. This kind of third party. And again, it's used in different ways at this time for this type of literature. But what we see here is they respond to Solomon or the lover's statement of her beauty. They say this in verse 11. We will make for you ornaments of gold studded with silver. The daughters of Jerusalem are responding to his response about her beauty. They now acknowledge seeing something in her that apparently they previously had not. Remember in verse 8, they were kind of just joking with her in such a way, saying, hey, if you desire his presence, then just go to him. And here, they heard the response of her lover, and they acknowledge her beauty as well. And you see this exchange done in a public way, right? We have a third party who witnesses this. And so for us as well, again, kind of beginning to kind of wrap things up here, we are called as well to express affection in public settings. Other people see this. So we express affection to each other in a more private manner, but also in a public manner. What does this look like? Well, when you talk about your spouse in a public setting, right, at the coffee shop around town, what do people hear when you talk about your spouse? Do they hear you talking about them in a nagging way, in a frustrating way? Do they sense distance between you? Or as you talk about them, are you complimenting them? Are you talking about the fantastic partner that they are? About the great worker that they are, how they help lead your family? Do you express support for them in a public manner? Because here you have a third party in the book of Song of Solomon who hears the lover talk about the beloved in such a way that they are drawn to her as well and acknowledge her beauty physically. Do you verbally express affection to each other? You see, when I was in college, that relationship didn't go well for a little while until I realized that I have a lot of unspoken expectations for my roommates. To me, some of them are pretty obvious, and maybe they are for you as well, right? It's obvious you should probably shower at least every other day. To me, it's pretty obvious you should probably ask before you touch other people's things. But again, for some people, that's not as obvious. You need to communicate that. And so after I made those expectations known, the relationships got a little better, and I just chose not to room with them the next year. But in our own relationships as well, in our marriages, maybe serious dating relationships, engagements, we desire to facilitate a deeper level of depth and connection. But we have a lot of unspoken expectations. We just expect them to know and to figure it out. Yet we don't make ourselves available and make that need known. And then when we do make the need known, our spouse sometimes doesn't express the support that we're desiring. It's a two-way relationship. You see this small exchange here in this text of these two lovers, and you've seen it play out in your life as well. Because here's the thing, love meets insecurity with security. All of us have different levels of insecurity, and you, as a partner to somebody else, should know what their insecurities are and be able to meet their insecurities with security. Because of all things, right, love is safe. 2 questions. What steps of availability have you made with your spouse? And then, when was the last time you verbally complimented and showed your support to your spouse? Do you do this with frequency? Let's bow our heads in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for allowing us just to spend some time here in Scripture and reflect upon our relationships that are ultimately meant to be a reflection of our relationship with you. So God, I pray for the marriages that are represented here today. Every single one of our marriages have room to grow and to improve and to grow deeper and more connected. So God, I just pray for those who might be struggling this morning in their marriage. Lord, I pray that the person who is feeling vulnerable or insecure is willing to make themselves available, and that the other party is willing to receive them with love and affection. And Lord, I pray for those relationships to grow. Lord, as we draw closer to each other, Lord, I pray we also draw closer to you. Lord, make our marriages stronger so that our homes might be stronger, so that we might be better reflections of you. We love you, God. Thank you for bringing us together this morning. In your name, amen.